Good evening and welcome to our Film at Lincoln Center virtual event for members. My name is Emily Vito and I'm the Assistant Director of Development with Film at Lincoln Center, and I'm so glad all of you decided to join us tonight for a discussion of Apple TV Plus's Defending Jacob that stars Chris Evans, Michelle Dockery, and Jaeden Martell. We're pleased to have Mark Bomback, the series creator, writer, and executive producer, and Oscar-nominated director and executive producer Morten Tyldum in conversation with Mara Webster. This event marks one of the many virtual programs that we're thrilled to offer to our members and patrons. Before we get the conversation underway, I'd like to highlight some exciting films in our virtual cinema. Starting tonight, don't miss a limited engagement of the 57th New York Film Festival favorite, First Cow. Then join us on July 21st for our members-only film club to discuss the film. Also playing is acclaimed new documentary John Lewis, Good Trouble, and opening tomorrow, July 10th, is Sundance standout Bloody Nose, Empty Pockets. You can browse the full lineup at filmlink.org. If you're not a Film at Lincoln Center member and are watching this special conversation on YouTube, we are a nonprofit organization that has proudly been home to the New York film community for more than 50 years. None of what we do would be possible without the support of our incredible members, and we hope you'll consider joining today. And last but not least, don't forget to subscribe to our YouTube channel for extensive video playlists and more conversations like this. Now I'm going to turn it over to Mara. Thanks, everyone.
Thank you so much, Emily, and that's an amazing virtual lineup that you guys have, and thank you to everyone who's tuned in right now. I wanted to start by just asking the both of you a little bit about the process of translating this, because it's based on William Landay's book, and you know, I know that Mark, you were originally thinking of it as a movie, and then you transitioned it to an 8-episode miniseries, and how did you really feel that stretching it out and having more time was going to really allow you to tap into a lot more of the nuanced layers of the characters?
I feel like someone's mic needs muting. I don't. Okay, I'll just power over it. So yeah, I didn't actually initially approach it as a film. It was sent to me with the idea that I would adapt it as a film because that's mostly the kind of writing I do. And I started reading the book, and I said, we just don't make these films anymore. Certainly not for the multiplex. And I was almost about to sort of cut bait and say, well, it's just an enjoyable novel. I'll read it. And as I kept on reading it, it occurred to me, actually, this is perfect material to be adapted for a limited series. You know, I was inspired by stuff like Broadchurch, or Rectify, or The Fall, like different shows that had sort of tackled this sort of crime genre, but with this very humanist and novelistic approach that was really able to not only give you a thrilling story, which of course the book does, but also give you the bandwidth to have a deep dive on who the characters are and really what the themes are, and have it be an exploration about the dynamics of family and not just simply the sort of nail biter of a crime. And so as I started thinking of it in those terms, but by the time I got to the end of the book, I couldn't call the producers fast enough and say, I'm not interested at all in the film version, but I'm dying to do the limited series version.
Yeah, and this was also your first time as a showrunner on a TV series as well. Was that something that you pitched yourself for, that you've been really interested in taking on, or was it just kind of a natural part of the process that came about?
It was certainly something I was really interested in. I have a few friends who are showrunners and have all had really terrific experiences. The truth is, I'm a writer though. I'm a screenwriter, and I know where my strengths lay. And I think in TV, it'd almost be odd to come in and say, I'm going to write every episode, which is what I wanted to do, but then I'm going to hand it off to another person to sort of EP it. That would be a little bit odd and truly doing myself a disservice, because one of the big differences between television and film is how much more of an active role the screenwriter has on set. And massive credit to Morten for, he comes from film, I come from film. That's a certain dynamic, and we both had to sort of readjust the way we usually approach making something to be more respectful of the other's roles in this medium. And we really formed a true partnership in a way that on a film, it wouldn't have been as necessary and would have been borderline unusual. So it was really appealing to me. And again, all credit to Morten for making my job and that transition really as easy as possible.
Yeah. And Morten, I feel like you also came in a much more hands-on role than a TV director often gets the opportunity to, and coming in as a producer and really kind of like working with Mark as he was fleshing out the scripts for everything, and in filming every single episode. Kind of began, was it something where you really wanted to come on as an executive producer and the initial plan was for you to direct every episode, or what was the genesis of that?
I mean, Mark sent me the pilot script, which I loved, and we talked about it. We found out that we had very similar vision for this. We both of us mentioned the same reference films. We talked about Mystic River, Michael Clayton, The Ice Storm. Like these are movies which we love them. I mean, as Mark said, we both come from sort of like a film background. I've been involved in 2 TV shows before, Counterpart and Jack Ryan, where I was executive producer, but there I only did the pilot. So I sort of like dipped my toe into sort of like producing and learning what TV means. But then they came back and said, we would like you to do all 8 episodes, which is very terrifying to think about because it's 8-hour material, and it's a lot. But yeah. I wanted to go into it, first of all, because I love the project. I love the script that Mark wrote. And, but also, as Mark said, you need to you really feel that you can have like a really close and understanding partnership with the showrunner, with the writer, with the creator on the stuff as a director, because it is new territory. As he said, you're kind of becoming, a 2-headed troll. You're sort of like, you're 2 persons who has to, which is, when you're doing 8 hours, is so necessary. Mm-hmm. You need sort of like a partner. You need a partner in crime when you're directing, so which can run off and look at costs and deal with some emergency that comes up when you're shooting, because we're shooting 12 to 14-hour days and still trying to prep a little bit while we're shooting. So it worked really well. I heard horror stories where the director and the showrunner, clinch, and it was really hard. But it was sort of like we had a phenomenal working relationship, and we actually just could support each other and really help each other go through it.
Yeah, and I love that part of your process together was kind of working on the scripts, and I read something that the 2 of you would even sit there and read the scripts out loud to each other, just to kind of hear it out loud and really get a sense and a feel of it. How is that a really useful tool for both of you in terms of, for you, Mark, as you're continuing to write the scripts and finesse them, and then for you, Morten, just to start visualizing where you see the show going?
I mean, Mark has heard all the dialogue spoken in very like Norwegian accent. That's something. Mark, we read it aloud and played around it, and it really helps that we walked into this very prepared, because this is. I mean, we went into it shooting it like an 8-hour movie.
Yeah.
We could not, a lot of TV. You write episodes as you go along. You prep everything as you go along, because you have several directors. You have maybe 2 crews that to change, but no, we had to go into it as it was just a long movie. So we had to be really prepared and try to do all the heavy lifting beforehand.
And the truth is, you'll write it, and in my office, I'll sometimes read pages aloud to myself to hear how it sounds. But there's just this strange alchemy that happens when things are read aloud, that it just changes the dynamic of the scene. And as talented a performer as Morten is, when the actors read it, then we have a whole nother insight into what's working and what's not, and then we dive back in again. And I think, again, I was an inexperienced showrunner. Morten had a limited experience in terms of working in this format, but I think we both brought to it a lot of experience in film. And one of the things you learn on a film is that the screenplays are blueprints. We're making a house, but they're not sacrosanct. They're fluid documents, and really our job is to be very flexible and be able to sort of react quickly to new ideas, while also preserving the things that we know are working in the script that we've sat with for a long time. And I think, that is a function of experience, and probably what gave Apple a bit of comfort, even though we had never really done this before.
Well, one of the other choices that I thought was an interesting one for you, Mark, was not to have a writer's room, and that you single-handedly wrote every single one of the scripts yourself. Was that something that was important to you from the get-go and you felt really strongly about, or was it just kind of a natural progress as you were writing them?
I'll be honest. It was a bit of selfishness on my part. I have no idea how to run a writer's room. I had a feeling that would be much more time-consuming than me writing it myself. And I love screenwriting, and so I didn't want to rob myself of the joy of writing all the episodes. There's not a single episode that I would have wanted to hand off to someone else and say, oh, I'd like to hear their interpretation of what I'm doing here. Again, I'm very collaborative, so I don't think of myself as the sole author of every line in the script and that I'm the end all of what should be in there or not. But I also trust myself as a writer a lot, and I've gotten better over time. And so this is going to sound weird to say, but like, I trust myself more than the person who's going to get hired to work for me. And so I'd rather just be the one doing the writing, and then say to people like Morten and the other producers, and even to the studio and the network, what do you think? Where is this not working? And then I can sort of react to it. But I think if I had a writer's room, it would have actually eaten up more time and probably led to misery all around. So it never once occurred to me to have one. At the very beginning, because it is a little unusual for one person to write all 8, it was pitched to me that if this feels like I'm dragging my feet and we're bumping up against time, that they might provide me with the writer's room to help me out in some way. But again, it was never sort of entertained in any meaningful way, and I had the fun of writing it all myself.
And the thing is that because Mark wrote everything, there's sort of like we could discuss every intention behind every line. Like it's Mark's work. So as director, you would work with the person who actually wrote the script. It would be kind of weird. That's the weird part. You're getting a script, and then when you're working with somebody, it's like, no, that person is part of the writer's room, which is somewhere else. I mean, this is something that we could work really close together on, literally because Mark wrote it, I directed all episodes. So we had sort of like a shorthand and really, really knew the material.
And while it was exhausting, I think I could speak for both of us when I say, like, there is something exhilarating about being on day 90 something and realizing like you've done all of the, it's like you run this ultra marathon. And there is something really unique about it. Like, working on a 120-page script now seems to be, if not a breeze, at least like a very economical way of telling a story. Yeah, I mean, that's the scripts, yeah.
Mark gave me this as we finished. So it's a lot of words.
Yeah, it's a lot of words.
It's a big file.
That's incredible. Before I jump into my next question, I just want to say for anyone who just joined, there's a Q&A box at the bottom of your screen. So if you have any questions that you think of along the way that you want to jump in and submit, we'll try and take a couple questions at the end. So use that to submit. And then I wanted to ask you both a little bit about the Chris Evans of it all, because it's not only that he's the leading role in this, that he also came on as a producer, and he's talked a lot publicly about how he often like takes a little bit of a pause before he says yes to something and really thinks it through. So what were some of the conversations that the two of you sat down and had with him that you felt were really valuable in getting him to come on board in both of those capacities in the end?
You want to say? No, Mark and I had a meeting with Chris at his LA house. And to begin with, walking into it, I mean, I've had a lot of respect for him as an actor, and I've loved his work. But we were kind of like looking into it, like, how will he understand? He's not a father himself, playing this part. How would he? What approach will he have? What thoughts will he have around it? And I think we were both very impressed by how well thought, how mature, how understanding he had of the character, the process, what he went through, the choices. I think he was a lot fascinating having a character that has been living with a lie, who sort of like created an image of himself, which is not true, who's sort of like running away from his past. So I think we were both very impressed having a meeting, how thoughtful and how, you know, how deep understanding he had for the material. Just after our first meeting.
He did take his time saying yes, and I think that can be a little nerve-wracking, but the good news is when people take, you know, an actor takes their time saying yes, and then they say yes, at least certainly in Chris's case, you tend to get a real true commitment. They haven't sort of entered into something impulsively and are second guessing themselves. And I feel like once Chris got on board, we never ever for a minute felt that he didn't trust us. We had sort of vetted each other. And I know he said in interviews and to us that, you know, as much as he was responding to the material, he was also responding to the way we spoke with each other and the way we spoke with him. You wind up spending an inordinate amount of time with each other, and it can be very stressful because there's a lot of pressures on you to sort of make the schedule, and it's just a million things going on when you start shooting. And he was a fantastic partner, not only as a producer and as an actor, but truly as like a storyteller. Like he was another person that we would powwow with, and if we were sort of questioning an idea in the story, we could always bring it to Chris and say, what do you think about this? And what's amazing is he would never come at it from either a sort of an actorly way of like, oh, what does this do to my character? And does this impact my, you know, my moment to shine in the scene or anything? It was always like, what's best for the story? And I think that was really one of his biggest assets as a producer, because that's what you really want from a producer, is to see the big picture and help you realize this thing, which is, you know, quadruply hard when it's 8 hours of a movie.
Yeah. I think one of the other skills in working with cast that's often underestimated is really just making sure that everybody's on the same page and that they really understand, you know, where you as the writers, producers, directors are coming from in terms of the tone that you want, the type of performance that you want. So how did the two of you kind of work with Chris and with Michelle to make sure that both of their performances were going to be really cohesive with each other, and the way that they were envisioning the characters was going to come together on screen in the way that it ultimately did?
I mean, I think the two most important things you can do to create a performance or something is, one, to really make everybody aware of where we want to go with this. That's sort of like that everybody gets the feel of why we're doing this, why Mark wrote it, why I want to direct it, what's kind of story we're telling, who are these people, and what's the world we're going to be living in. And then second of all, we really feel that this is a safe place. This is a place where you can bring your thoughts, your skills, your emotions into this, and we will try things out. We will know if it's wrong or wrong, but you can fail without too much of a consequence here, because we will just then change it. It should be a place where we try things out, experience, because we're all in this together. And I think we really created this feeling of, you know, we become a very tight-knit group who did this, and everybody felt it was okay to discuss things, to come up with ideas, to sit around the monitor, to watch each other, to really wanted to you know, we all wanted to make it better, and nobody had, so as Mark said, I don't think there was ever anybody who was going like, I felt the need to protect their character or their moment, or was jealous of somebody, or I wanted this, or whatever. It became very collaborative, and so we had a phenomenal cast in that sense, that they really took ownership in this, and really wanted something, and really wanted to contribute in all ways. Yeah.
And for you, Morten, as well, is there a difference in the way that you work with your actors and work with your cast when it is performances like this? Because there's so many stunningly beautiful moments that are very internalized. We're not necessarily hearing everything that they're going through. You do such a great job at drawing that out in them. Is there a difference in the way that you work with your actors when it is more internalized versus something that's a little bit more dialogue driven at all?
Yeah, I mean, it's in many ways, the more quiet moments are almost harder. Because it's really hard for an actor. It's almost harder for them it's harder for them to perform, and it's almost harder for us to shoot, because it's not immediate. You second guess things a lot more when it's not, you know, the bigger it is, the more loud, the more, you know, if it's an actor breaking down or getting angry, whatever, it's easier to get sort of like that rush when you see that performance. If it's somebody who's tied to a chair, like, Michelle almost doesn't speak at all in episode 7, which is the big courtroom. And at the same time, she's maybe the main character of that. Her arch during that episode is, she's the one who has to witness. A lot of the point of view of that whole episode is shot from her. So at the same time, she has no lines, which is this is really on purpose until the last scene, where she says, I know he did it. So we didn't want her to speak. We wanted her to just be sort of like this witness who just have to sit there and is not allowed to speak because she's not a lawyer, she's not a defendant. And for her, I know it was so exhausting to sit there and be so emotional and have all these things go through her and not be able to, have to really express it in all these subtle ways. And we talked a lot about it. How can we make this different? How can we make it not being able to repeat yourself? And how can I help her with the camera? How can I help, being really close? We're doing a lot of, point of view is something we talked a lot about. Like you can see this, a lot of times we cut to these shots, which are like a wide lens, a little bit high up and very close to a character. But we also, in the sound, make all the other voices more distant. You can also hear, people's breathing and maybe a slight heartbeat a little bit more. And this is something we do in a lot of scenes, where we suddenly cut to a person and sort of like experience that scene by being very close to a person, and then we go back into the scene. So, and then, on a thriller like this, how we actually navigate point of view, which character we see the scene through, and how we shoot them. Do we see them, from a distance? Do we see them, attached to another character? Are we being, close to them? All of these were, a lot of discussions, and it was something we really mapped out way ahead.
Mm-hmm. And one of the things that's so wonderful in watching it is the way that, both of you and the rest of the creative team have clearly thought really, really intentionally about the visual style, and it feels so cinematic, regardless of the screen that you're watching it on. Was that something that was important to both of you from the get-go? And then how did that inform the choices that you then made about, what type of camera are we going to use to shoot on it? What type of camera angles? What locations are we going to use? Just what's the overall visual aesthetic of this going to look like?
I mean, look, again, we're feature people, and this was an opportunity to make the kind of feature that we're no longer allowed to make. So we were suddenly making an 8-hour film that is in the vein of the things that we've always loved. And so I think if you were to read the scripts, you'd sense that that's what they're aiming for. And I think in every conversation we had, we approached it, not to sound hoity-toity, but as we were working on a work of art together, and we're really going to explore what it means to be a human being. And that's sometimes very epic and sometimes very intimate. And again, I feel like the film version of something that is this plot heavy would necessarily sacrifice a lot of these smaller moments in the service of making a 2-hour running time and just having a lot of plot. But I think because it can get very expansive, but also, again, very, very intimate, as Morten was saying, the language of the camera really sort of helps us tell the story. And, and in general, we always talked about this as this sort of New England noir. Like that part of America just has a very particular sense of place and a very a particular mood that I think Jonathan Freeman, our cinematographer, and certainly with Morten's guidance, sort of really captured and amplified. Morten, you could probably speak to this as well, of course.
Yeah, no, it's first of all, big kudos to Jonathan Freeman, extraordinary DP, which literally came from Game of Thrones. It was the thing he shot before, and he, it's very happy. A lot of the times, because before every movie, you do sort of like your movie, you find all your references, you try to create sort of like a language. And I was very happy. I looked at it after we were shot. I mean, John was actually talking about it. Like, very rarely we actually stuck to it because it was such a long shoot, and we knew that sometimes you get inspired. You suddenly feel like, you don't trust your old ideas. Yeah, we had to really, really stick to the ideas and the plan we had. And looking back at it, I feel it's really paid off. That it's that all kind of like the rules, how we. Like very little, there's almost like no sunlight until the opening of episode 8, where there's a whole scene where you follow the sun coming through the windows and the warm light. There's how we shoot people against windows a lot. Through windows, we expose for the outside, so everything inside is a little dark. These are people who were like trapped in sort of like in prison. How we frame, how we decided that, you know, with 4 people around a table talking, you can't just move your cameras a lot. So we decided to instead, let's use a lot of setups, never cut between the 2 similar frames. So it feels like the camera is constantly moving, but it's down to editing. So we created all these, you know, these language things, and when to go wide and when to really open up and when to be tight and when to stay in one long take. And so, and we because it was so overwhelming, we just said, let's really stick to the rules. We have our language, let's really do it. And I think that's when people are saying, oh, wow, it really looks like a movie, it really looks like, it's because it's kind of like, because it feels like it has rules. It feels like it has an aesthetic that it stays to it. And I'm very happy that we were able to do that.
Yeah, I was also really interested in the physical aesthetic that you worked on with Chris and Michelle for their characters as well, you know, because they're both a little bit younger than the characters they're playing. And I know that, you know, Chris grew a beard to feel like he could have a child the age of Jacob. And then also even just thinking about the way that their costumes tell a story, because it's not an extravagant costume, but it still tells a lot about them. So how did you kind of map out with them what the visual aesthetic choices for their characters were going to be to really add to the nuance and layers of their characters?
You want to start, Mark?
We should begin by crediting Johanna Argan, who is our costume designer, who was really super helpful in helping us find that language from the costumes. You know, for me, in the book, the characters are in their 50s, right? Or Laurie's in her 40s and he's in his 50s. And rather than just sort of pretend that we don't see the fact that they're very attractive and younger than we're used to seeing parents of a 14-year-old, one of the early decisions I made was to lean into that and actually reference in one of the episodes rather early on that they did get married too young. Jacob was not a planned pregnancy, and they sort of jumped into this marriage. And what you start to understand from that is that they didn't have the time that maybe another couple would have had to dive deep into who they were as people before they just started this family. And that obviously has consequences to our story. So it was an example of taking a casting idea and then having it inform the story, and a nice feedback to that. And there's something about both of them. They're obviously unusually attractive human beings. Like if they were a plumber and a school teacher, you would still stop in your tracks and say, wow, these people are exceptionally good looking. But I think, again, it helps our story because it builds into them this admirability that you could sense the community has for them, that then starts to sort of this bottom falls out on it, and that the same people who sort of look to them as aspirational figures are the same kind of people who are pretty quick to turn on them. And so again, it was using the sort of things that are just, they can't escape to our advantage.
Yeah. And then I also wanted to jump into talking a little bit about some of the specific research that you did around, you know, some of the elements where it's a little bit more legal or a little bit more scientific. I think, Mark, you've mentioned the James Fallon book on the psychopathic brain, which is a really fascinating piece. And you also the resource of William Landay, having previously worked in the district attorney's office. So how did you both kind of work together on those more nuanced and like specific research elements and find ways to pull that information into the story, but have it feel like it was really about the story and character development and not just a tool for delivering this information that you wanted to bring into the story?
Well, again, that's, you know, it's a function of having done this for just long enough that I'm able to sort of keep my eye on the prize, which is the best storytelling you can do. But part of telling a good story is, you know, that verisimilitude and really feeling like, oh, this is really happening, and I'm learning a little bit about how the world works in a way I didn't before this started. So in terms of James Fallon, actually one of the executives at Apple turned me on to him, and he became a consultant. And he's this fascinating guy who is basically an expert in psychopathology, and one time was looking at a bunch of brain scans, including some he had done of his own family, and pulled one out and said, oh, this is clearly the brain scan of someone who's a psychopath. And it was his own brain scan, and realized that a lot of his personality quirks were very much in line with someone who is a traditional psychopath. And so he was really super helpful with the Dr. Vogel scenes and giving me the right language. Morten would sometimes go crazy because I would be a little bit loath to throw out all this research that I'd done. And I kept on trying to convince him, no, people want to get sort of snowed by how much science we have in this one moment. But of course, we had to do a lot of slashing and burning before we wound up shooting. And then in terms of Bill Landay, the author, he was a resource, that's impossible to quantify. I mean, he gave us this fantastic story. And obviously I had to veer from it quite a bit in terms of how you tell the story again as a TV series, but I was never not able to sort of pick up the book and say to myself, okay, what was it that we loved about this part of the story, and see what he had done with it. And then in terms of the legalese, he's a former assistant district attorney himself. So I had this ability on any moment to say, does this seem true to you? And by the way, he was great about saying, this is not exactly accurate. A really seasoned lawyer is going to roll their eyes a bit, but someone like me who hasn't practiced in a little bit and knows the law just enough will totally live with this. I've seen more egregious mistakes on law series. And so he was just fantastic. And then we also had a wealth of people who would actually, Morten had this inspired idea of casting real bailiffs as the bailiffs in our courtroom. And so that bailiff dialogue is actually from them. Like I had some version of it and they said, no, this is exactly how you say it. So
we worked really hard on sort of like, we didn't want it to feel like a TV court. So we wanted to feel real. And it's always such a hard balance when it comes to sort of like research and science and real and real procedures in these things, that you want it to be real, but at the same time you don't want to overwhelm, or bog it down or make it steal the focus of the drama, because the drama is the engine that drives everything. So if it derails things, you're in trouble. So there's always like a really hard discussion, like when are we leaning too much into it, and when are we taking away from, our actors, the people you really want to care for and how they experience it. And at the same time, you want it to be enough, both with the vocal scenes, but also like the courtroom and the procedures there. And I think we ended up, there was a lot of discussion, like just how, we have a pre-trial, they go through all of this, they set a bail, there's a lot of, procedures that happened that we wanted to feel in. We wanted to feel that this actually is real. This is how it would happen.
Yeah. One of the things that you both do in terms of the way that you craft the story that's so artful is playing with the idea of tension. And you're really kind of playing around with how much information you give us to like pull us in. And then there's certain things that we never see happen on screen. There's certain dialogue that we never hear spoken. And I think, Morten, you've mentioned previously how like the idea of like what our brain doesn't get to experience almost heightens that experience. So I was just curious about the way that you really thought about the way that you wanted to draw that out, where you wanted to give us information and where you actually really thought, let's pull this back, let's hold this in and not give it to them because it'll be more of a treat.
It's a lot of it is, again, something we talked about is point of view. It's when do you get knowledge, when do you get information, who is it based on? Sometimes you want to be with a character. You don't know anything. You're walking into a room with a character and you experience the same moment they do. Like Chris finding out that the fingerprint is from his son. You're with him, you're feeling the dread, you're having all this hints of something bad is going to happen, but you're with him and you're feeling the dread together with him. And sometimes, we're allowing the audience to have some information that they don't have. Pat's looking at his phone and seeing pictures of the dead boy, them. So you have that. And then there's things where, you almost see things after the character. You're letting the character experience something, reacting. You don't know what they're reacting to, and then we know. So these are all, as storytellers, as filmmakers, these are decisions we have to make all the time. And in a thriller, some of the most important decisions you can make, because it's all about, keeping tension. And you're right. I think that by holding back and not letting people know, what goes on in the audience's mind is always stronger than anything we can come up with. So, and a lot of it came out to Jacob, which is, the character. What is Jacob thinking? What actually happened? Why is he saying that? What goes on with him? And I have to say that Jaeden did such a phenomenal job of performing that, because it is so, there's such a big enigmatic performance that you can interpret in so many ways. And it's so hard to play a scene believable and not really be certain what his emotions are in this scene. And he's kind of interesting. He's kind of the only one who really knows if he did it or not. Because we told him, me and Mark sat down with him very early, that we want you to make up your mind what he did and what he didn't do, but don't tell anybody. Don't tell any actors, don't tell anybody, don't tell me, don't tell Mark, don't let him know. You perform with that as your, as in your backbone. So, and that also keeps him, that means that we have to keep guessing on when is he lying, when is he not lying. And yeah, so that's, you're right. That's part of like the not knowing and having to guess. It's sort of like one, the thriller engine that goes through this whole story.
Yeah. Did you think consciously about the journey that you wanted the audience to go on in terms of okay, we want them to lean in a little bit more to thinking that he did it here, or we want them to be questioning it here, or did you really just allow that to flow from Jaeden's performance?
No, I think that was very calculated on our part. I mean, I know in the writing of the scripts there was almost a pass I would do that was dedicated just to that balance and making sure that whenever, like, there's just, I know Morten and I both love this little sequence in, I think episode 5, where Jacob does this very horrifying, even though relatively minor thing where he texts the word slut to Sarah. But I know, like, I remember seeing it with my kids and they were like shocked. That was as horrifying, if not more horrifying than the idea that he could have killed somebody, is that he texted the word slut to her. And then right on the heels of that, he has this scene with Andy, which is one of the sweetest scenes in the show, where they go fishing and there's this bonding between them. And that was the kind of seesaw that I was aspiring to throughout the writing of it, and that Morten sort of immediately seized on, and the actors as well. And so we would always be very, very aware that, like, the audience is constantly thinking they're smarter than the show, and that they're always going to want to jump to the point of saying, oh, I'm positive now, I finally figured this out. And so every time we would tip them that direction, we would want to make sure that we've done something that's hopefully subtle but powerful, to sort of say, wait, that's impossible because now I've just witnessed this moment. And
that was sorry.
No, so that's what it means to be a parent. You know what I mean? That's the sensation parents have all the time with their children.
That was the fun part, actually, sitting on the sideline, just reading comments when the show was, airing, screening, week by week, and seeing Twitter comments and where there was a big, social media dialogue going on by people who saw this, and people were so sure. They were interpreting things, and it was so funny watching it, like, okay, they're catching up on all these little things, which, these little breadcrumbs we put all over. And no, they were so sure he did it. No, he was so sure he didn't do it. And it was like, no, it's fun. It's part of the fun about, a film like this or a TV series like this is, to play with people's expectations and leading them in here this way and then suddenly turning them around. So,
yeah. Well, one of the things where you do that so deliciously is that car crash scene with Michelle and Jaeden near the end of the show. And kind of, I was interested in the way that you both thought about that specific scene, because there's about 5 different directions and nuances and thoughts that takes you down. In watching it, you really have no idea in that moment, which is the beauty of it. Was that always the clear intention that you worked on with Michelle, or did you try different directions and different avenues before you landed on that final tone?
I mean, that scene was rewritten a lot. It was really microsurgery to get that rhythm to work. And then we did rely a lot on Michelle and Jaeden, both to sort of elevate whatever was on the page. But I remember the specific breakthrough really on that scene was the moment where with the earlier drafts, I didn't have her say this, but finally when she says, just tell me if you did it. And then Jaeden actually says, fine, I did it. Will you just stop? And then it hits her. I'll never know. Like that's as much as we're ever going to get of a confession. He literally says, I did it, and it still is not at all satisfying. And it's that thing that ultimately sort of pushes her over the edge.
I wonder.
Yeah, no. I'm just going to say we all knew that this is sort of like the big turning point of the whole. This is like the core scene. So we talked about it a lot, and it was a really hard scene to shoot, also for the performance, because car scenes sucks. I mean, it's a horrible thing to shoot, no matter how you want to do it. If you're shooting in the real car, or if you're doing as we did it with like projections around, and we had gimbals, so the car was moving, and there's rain and wind machines, a lot of noise, and it's hard for actors to sit in this pretend driving and really like so it was a hard scene to shoot, and we tried a lot of different things, and I think we both know that there was this one performance that Michelle did where we sort of like, you just know, he's sitting behind the monitors like, there it is. And it is when she started to repeat the same line several times. She almost like she went into this like trance, and you literally saw her like falling apart and disappearing. And it's and we knew like, there it was, and now we would just needed to recreate that for the matching shots. But it's kind of like a nerve-wracking going into shooting something like this, because it needs to work. You need to find out that everybody can believe in this, and it's very performance-driven.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I wanted to jump into one or two of the questions that we had submitted via the Q&A box. This one's from Linda, and is really great. They're crediting the silent dialogue with Michelle and how wonderful that was. And her question is actually about the color palette and the lighting design set, and whether that was already set in pre-production, or did it organically develop because it was so beautiful to watch. Bravo.
But yeah, sorry, I didn't hear you. But
really just kind of like whether you had the idea from the offset of what you wanted the color palette and the lighting design to look like with the show, because it's so beautiful to look at, or if it was something that developed organically when you were making the show.
It very much so. If you see Michelle, since we're talking about the courtroom, you see she had the same design blouse in every court day, and she starts out with the dark one, almost black, and she ends up in the white. When she's convinced he did it, and we really worked a lot with color. Like Chris' character is in the beginning of the show is a character that's sort of like put on the uniform. He's pretending to be someone. He's hiding his identity. So he always wore blue suits, white shirt, blue tie, and a blue suit in every scene. Until his world is falling apart and he's getting drained of colors, and he starts wearing just brown and gray, and he sort of like goes back and gets closer to his dad, sort of like his roots, where he's coming from. And Michelle, in a way, is sort of like becomes this ghost in the end of episode 8. Mm-hmm. She's falling apart. She can't sleep. Her guilt of sort of like protecting her son, which she thinks is a murderer, is weighing so much heavily on her, and she has this like one of my favorite scenes is when they're talking and standing in opposite doorways, yeah. and they're so far away, and there's all these boxes between them, and they're talking, and we made all the rooms so dark. There's just a few lamps on, and she has this white sweater, and she's almost like this glowing ghost in this doorway, which he can't really get close to, and it's so. It's and also Jonathan's lighting is phenomenal. He lights really, really beautiful. Everything is soft lighting. Everything is done. We really believe that less is more. We didn't want it like a very lit show. We wanted it to feel kind of subdued.
Yeah. So I wanted to ask for each of you, what was the element of making this show, kind of looking back at it reflectively now, that you felt really challenged you the most at the time, but perhaps that you really kind of came away learning the most from, if there was a particular moment or particular scene?
I mean, for myself, truthfully, it probably was the producing part of it. Was in terms of my learning curve was just impossible to overstate how much I had to learn in a short amount of time. And sometimes I would be on phone calls with Paramount or Apple and speaking a language I didn't know that I even knew in terms of budget and schedule. And, the truth is these things are really, really time intensive. And as Morten said earlier in our conversation, like our average day was a 12 to 14 hour day. And once you started working on that schedule, you really forfeited the ability to do much planning for future days. And so you're spending your lunch hour planning what you're doing the next day, and you'll forfeit your weekend to try to get ahead a little bit. Usually on a film, I would rely on the producer to sort of plug me into that equation, whereas in this, Morten and I were the ones figuring all that stuff out. And so I look back on it fondly and say, gee, I really learned a lot and think I can bring a lot to the next thing I work on as a producer, not just as a writer. But I also know how fortunate I was that it turned out well, because we were, learning how to drive while driving at 70 miles an hour.
I mean, I concur completely. I think that's the biggest takeaway, because it was really hard. I mean, not going to deny it was both extremely rewarding because I really loved our cast. I loved working with Mark. We had a phenomenal team. The crew was really good, but it was tough because it was a long shoot. It was really the pressure on getting a lot of scenes every day, and it was like sprinting a marathon. It was like there was no easy days. And if you do a movie, you have some really tough days, and then you have a shooting, something very easy. You see, you have a little bit transition day, and there's always these lighter days. But here, there was like no easy days. So then dealing with all of that, dealing with the planning, dealing with as Mark said, producing on top of this was super hard, but also super rewarding in a way. And another thing which I take away from it is that, and this is maybe because we were two, we could really discuss things beforehand, and we sort of like gave each other, it was easier to really trust in our instincts because we were two. And I learned from that, I learned even more now to not second guess, like casting instincts, big instincts, big ideas, because that's the hard, the more tired you get, the more you work on something, the more you feel the need to sort of like come up with something new or change something. But really sticking to our guns, really believing in the first thing we said and just staying there was a lot easier because we're two. And that's really something I feel I want to take further, that a lot of the times the first vision you had is the right one, to really stick with it and not letting all the noise, because there's a storm and there's like a noise around you all the time. People who wants to change things or cut things or do things, and just being steady on course is hard. But that's something I really take from this, is that really was something we benefited from.
Yeah, well, you both did such an amazing job with the show, and I love your collaborative relationship. I feel like it really shines through just from the way that you flow off of each other and talk about it. So thank you so much for taking the time this evening to sit down and talk so in depth about how you put the show together. It's a really wonderful accomplishment.
Thanks for having us.
Thank you so much.
Of course.
Okay.
Thanks.
Bye-bye.
Bye.
Bye.